With a yo-ho-ho, it's TaleOfTheToaster. Welcome to a little theory crafting video. Bit of experimental stuff to try on the channel, but I'm excited to delve into a topic I think only I could ever come up with, basically. We're going to talk about the idea of doing the Football Frontier International within Inazuma 11 Go, where we kind of had a fake one where the Earth 11 took on all the Asian teams and then they turned out to be aliens and then they went off to space for a completely different topic. The idea of, what if the Go trilogy had a normal FFI has been discussed by a lot of people. So I'm not just going to do the standard, what would the team be? What would the season be like? I'm going to force myself into a niche where I have to kind of choose stuff that you wouldn't normally expect. And when I say wouldn't expect, I mean it's impossible, because it flies against the original vision of the Japanese writers. But in the dubbed versions of Inazuma 11 Go, as you'll know if you've seen any of it, a lot of the characters were kind of reimagined to be essentially not Japanese in their dialogue, their names. For example, Shindou Takuto, a Japanese-born guy, was reworked to be an Italian man with an Italian name, and he says things like Forza and Fuerte in the middle of conversations. So in the Japanese version of Inazuma 11, he is simply Japanese, but in the dub, they decided to make him Italian. For what reason? Who knows? It's not my place to answer, but I just think it's really charming anyway, and I kind of enjoy it, especially because Inazuma 2 was so focused on going to different regions of Japan and giving them different UK accents, whereas now that they did Inazuma 3, where they had actual teams from around the world, they're like, we like these accents, we want to keep them around, how can we do that? And it kind of worked with a little headcanon, even if it's not necessarily true. I always pictured this as, well, Raimon 10 years after the original trilogy is so successful and world-renowned for football that essentially people will have travelled from around the world to enrol their kids there and let them study football in Japan at a top football school. And that is genuinely like what I thought when I was playing through Inazuma 11 Go for the first time. I played it, my first experience with it was the dubbed game, so I didn't know they weren't actually meant to be like Italian or whatever. I just thought, well, yeah, the Raimon's really big now, so they've come from all around the world to be here. So this video is going to explore the idea of what if those characters actually were from those countries and they are international students in Japan. What would then happen if an FFI happened in the Go season in place of Galaxy, with all of those international players actually representing their own real country? So we're going to open with Spain, because that would actually have two characters that could represent it. You have Gabi Garcia, and you also have Aitor Cazador, who both have Spanish accents within the games just to play off each other, I guess. Back when I first played Inazuma 11 Go, I didn't even realise Gabi was meant to be Spanish and Riccardo was meant to be Italian. I thought they were both just the same as each other because I hadn't learned enough about the world at that point. But no, they are definitely different, but Aitor and Gabi are not. So in this imaginary scenario, they would be playing for Red Matador, the original Spanish team that we saw in the original trilogy, but 10 years later, just like how in Go Galaxy, you have big waves from 10 years ago for Australia, and then you have the new big waves, even if they then ended up being aliens. So this would be like a modern day Red Matador, but this time they would actually be a part of the main story and they would actually be good. Closer, therefore, to the Spain team from Inazuma 11 Arion, which, fun fact, is actually more about Catalonia, the top right region of Spain where Barcelona is. At the very least, when you first fight against Clario's team, he's specifically representing Barcelona, and then half of the Spanish national team is made up of his fellow Catalan players. But this is just like a pure Spanish team. Gabi and Aitor would make for a good team because Gabi could probably be the captain of Red Matador. He fits it visually with his pink hair after all, and I think the main point of this team would just be further exploring the dynamic between Gabi and Aitor, because in Chrono Stones we saw how Aitor was the one person who could tell how Gabi was truly feeling about things, and then watched as Gabi got his fighting spirit, got the Mixie Max with Joan of Arc, and then we were waiting for Aitor's turn to get his, football development and his character development, and it just never happened. So one of the main points of this imaginary FFI would be to actually have those two as the main characters on a Spanish team and let them further develop their bond, learn to actually trust and really like each other, which they did by the end of Chrono Stones and even Go 1, but it wasn't, put in writing. They could actually have an arc where they really admit they're kind of like best mates, especially as Gabi's been torn away from Riccardo at this point. And it could actually be a really defensive team, because Gabi would be the captain and Aitor would be a defender as well. So they could even theme it around the mist, I just think it could be really cool. So let's keep up the theme of talking about old teams reimagined, and I've mentioned him enough, so let's just do Riccardo di Rigo, who will be playing for Italy, where he has always lived his entire life. Yes, indeed. But, as you know, Italy is a very important team in Inazuma 11. That means that Riccardo is playing for Orpheus. So there's so much you can do with this. You might be able to have Paolo Bianchi as a coach, and he was always someone I really wanted to be in Go anyway as an adult, just bring him back alongside Kevin Dragonfly, who'd flown over from Italy. I would have loved to see adult Paolo. We never got it, but it could be his chance here. Orpheus could now be coached by Paolo Bianchi, and Riccardo di Rigo could be his team captain. Or they could go the other way entirely, because in my mind this season is replacing Go Galaxy. Who was a main character in Go Galaxy? That's right, Ray Dark. Astro Black was the coach of the Earth 11 throughout the Galaxy tournament thing. So now that that tournament doesn't exist, they've clearly already made the decision to unkill Ray Dark. What do they do with him now? He could go back to Orpheus. You totally have a complete choice. You either have the positive route of Paolo's running it, you have the negative route where Ray Dark's going to run it again, or you could try and put them together and see how that works. This isn't really about Riccardo, I know, but I think it'd be the perfect opportunity to give them a Paolo-type dependable player to run new Orpheus, and they could be just as important as before. Especially because we even have another option. I don't think they would necessarily do this, but it's an option. Because, the whole thing about Orpheus match in the first place, it was about Jude first and foremost, but he always had David Sanford by his side. Now you kind of imagine it as Riccardo is on the Italian team. He could have Roma by his side. Now we know Roma is not Italian. Even in the dub, he is still as Japanese as ever. He's called Ryoma Nishiki in every version. But he did study in Italy for a few years. Is that enough to count as an Italian citizen? Officially, no. But in the world of storytelling, perhaps. If they really wanted to, they could put Roma on the Italian national team with Riccardo, just based on the fact that he lived there for a moment. Would they do that? I don't know, because he's also clearly very Japanese, and let me tell you, as a result of this video, the Japanese national team is incredibly short-staffed. But above all, I think it would basically be an arc where if Astro Black is coaching the team, he's no longer a bad guy, he's trying to win the tournament and basically do his Go Galaxy arc, or what little we can understand of it. He still wants to be the football god. It's his very much intention to win, even if he has to do some weirdo tactics to get there. And Riccardo will mainly be investigating him behind the scenes to know if they can trust him, just like in Galaxy. And they can even do some of the wilder stuff from Galaxy towards the end, where the android Astro Black could briefly play in the Italian team if they want to bend the rules that much, even if it does get deleted by a satellite or whatever. I just think Riccardo on Orpheus opens up a treasure trove of possibilities. So we'll finish off the main three, and now we get to talk about Victor. And I think out of all of the characters, this is probably the one who'd be nearest to final boss territory, especially because, again, this is replacing Go Galaxy, where Victor Blade was the captain of the boss before the final boss. He was the captain of Morbius, where he wasn't a bad guy, but he was very much trying to defeat Arion, and had like a hidden reason for doing so. And I feel like they would do the same with Victor on his new national team, probably somewhere in like the semi-finals of the FFI. But what team would Victor play for? We actually have two different options, so this discussion is more about where they'd put him. There is the more likely option based on the dubbing, and that would be to put him on Russia. Russia does have some precedent in Inazuma, not in the classic series, but in Arion, where Perfect Spark, spoilers if you haven't seen Arion, you know, I'm wearing the kit already. They are, of course, the final boss of that season, and they represent Arion itself, the villainous organization. Maybe Akihiro Hino brings that plot forward by like 10 years, or more like 7, but they could actually have Inazuma Arion as Season 6 instead of Season 8, essentially, and Victor playing for Russia could be a huge part of that. So why do we think Victor is Russian? It's mainly, obviously, the writing of his dialogue. Again, he speaks in a very, partly Russian way, but I think the main giveaway that Russia is what they're going for is the names of him and his brother Vladimir. Although they are called Victor and Vladimir, which are kind of localized Russian names, they actually refer to each other as Vitya and Volodya. Now, the name Vladimir has a lot of different translations depending on where it's used. You know, you could be called Vladimir in Lithuania or Belarus or Romania or anywhere like that, and it would make sense, but they would translate it slightly differently. But Vitya and Volodya are specifically the Russian translations. And maybe that's like obvious, I don't need to over-explain it. Everyone probably thinks of Victor's dub accent as Russian anyway. But I've always thought a little differently, and I think they could technically spring a surprise here, because when I think of Victor, yes, there is the point of Vitya and Volodya, but I don't think Russia. I think Transylvania. More in the fictional sense of, you know, it's Count Dracula, I live in Transylvania and I will eat your blood. That's what I think of when I think of Victor, even if it's a fictional inspiration. But it's not entirely fiction. Transylvania is a real place in the world. All the stories of Count Dracula are obviously fiction, unless you really want to buy into it, but it is in Romania, in the real world, and there are people in Romania called Victor, called Vladimir, and it's the real world location of Transylvania. So you could basically either have Perfect Spark early and put Victor into Russia. Maybe you even time travel his older brother with the working legs back into it and they can work together. Or you can try and do something more original. It would mean having Romania in like a World Cup semi-final, which hasn't happened since like the 1950s type time. But if they wanted to give Victor the true like Morbius hero treatment, they could instead just put him somewhere unexpected. And if the Transylvania vibes are actually what I'm buying into, he could be Romanian. Who knows? He's not, he's Japanese, but the dubbers wanted him to be something else. Oh, especially because, did you know this? So Vladimir mainly became famous because of Vlad the Impaler, right? He was Romanian. This isn't baseless. It's just not got too much to go on, but yeah, you could just have a full Vlad the Impaler themed team with Vladimir's younger brother Victor in it. Let me know what you think else could be in a Romanian Inazuma team. So let's make things a little less important now. I debated whether or not to include this guy, but Ade Kébé, at the end of the day, he very much does have a British dialect. even if it's not what you would imagine as a British dialect. Ade Kébé is very specifically based on the Geordie accent, which you have if you live in Newcastle, or if you were at least raised in Newcastle, because I live in Newcastle, so does TXM, but a little further out, so he's not got the accent as much. But I don't have the accent because I'm from Yorkshire, but I do live in Newcastle, and Ade Kébé's accent kills me. I think it's so funny, and technically, because they have given Ade Kébé a very specific English accent, they could put him on the English team. I don't think it really counts. It's more just, you know, Inazuma 2, you had all the accents from around England representing different regions of Japan. Like, Sean Frost has a Yorkshire accent because it's northern, so he has that to represent the northern Hokkaido. Ade Kébé is clearly meant to be Japanese, even if he's got a Geordie way of speaking, but I think you could have some fun with it. He could just be a total bit character in the Knights of Queen, or you could even not even have him in the World Cup and just say he plays for Newcastle FC now, and his club's just been bought out by Shamshir, the Saudi Arabian team. Is that even the right one, Shamshir? Yeah, it is, right? But it doesn't sound great, but it's what happened to Newcastle FC in the real world, so maybe Ade Kébé just has his Newcastle club bought out by a Saudi team, and then he has to play for them. They could do whatever they want. This is a football series where an android 50-year-old man got deleted by a laser beam from space for playing with aliens and not abiding by souls and totems and all that. Inazuma will do anything it wants, so do not doubt them. Here's a big point then. Let's bring Rose Griffon into the forefront, just like Red Matador, and we can now have a France team. I'm sure you know that means that JP, Jean-Pierre Lapin, has got himself onto a national team easier than he did with getting onto the Earth 11. But, again, this is the chance to have his Galaxy arc just somewhere else. Instead of being overshadowed by Terry, the goalkeeper, I see JP being on the French team either as a goalkeeper or as a defender. They basically decide at the start of the season whichever one he wants to play is the one he won't be in. If he wants to be a goalkeeper, he'll either be on the bench or he'll be forced to play in defence, or vice versa. Maybe he wants to go back to being a defender and instead he's just being a rubbish goalie. I think more likely, yeah, he wants to be a goalie, but he's stuck in defence or he's stuck on the bench, overshadowed by someone else, and he has the Go Galaxy arc. He'll never get Milky Way Rocket, of course, because this isn't in space anymore, or we have liftoff in the dub. But I think this works even better because JP is not the only Raimon player who would actually be able to represent France. This is totally under the radar, but Hugh, or Hugues Badet, I don't know how to say his full dub name, but there is a second French player in Raimon in Go. He's the captain of the second team and then works his way up to the main one alongside Shun, who is not on the French team. He's playing for Japan or he's doing nothing. He's probably doing nothing. But I think it would be even funnier if JP was either getting constantly relegated to the bench or the defence, while his teammate Hugh, who he'd always overshadowed himself as a member of Raimon, like Hugh was barely involved with either of Raimon Go's campaigns. What if they just switched it and then Hugh was actually an integral part of Rose Griffon while JP was barely getting on? It'd be a huge, like, proving ground scenario. It's not like Hugh would be the captain or the main player of the team. He's not good enough for that, but if he's constantly outstaging JP when he was always under the shadow, I think that would be great. And you know what? Again, it's Inazuma. They could just time travel Joan of Arc from the past to go and play on this team, because war is like football after all, and maybe she can upstage JP. Or maybe they can go the Arion route and JP gets on the French team and then they just get their baguettes poisoned and can't play. I cannot overstress how that's a real plot point in Inazuma 11. I guess there's even the side point of Charisse Blossom from the Earth 11 has a very French-inspired name, just we never got to see how she talked in the games, and she's also very specifically raised in Okinawa, so I can't see that happening. So now, just like Russia, we have another country which has an Orion team but nothing in the Classic series. We get to talk about China, albeit not exactly with a main character. This is Wanli Changcheng's inspiration, and it's kind of 50-50. You know, someone like Gabi and Riccardo, they speak Spanish, they have Spanish names, everything about them is meant to represent, yep, Spain and Italy. Whereas Wanli is kind of halfway there. He's got a Chinese name, he's got a Chinese special move, the Great Wall of China, obviously, but his dialogue is not very Chinese inspired. I'm not sure if there's really a good way to represent that, but they certainly tried with the South Korean team to make them sound stereotypical in Season 3. Maybe they got backlash for that and they decided, you know what, Wanli in our minds is Chinese, but we don't want to try and ham up the way he talks, or we might just get called a racist for it. But he has enough to say you could technically put Wanli on the China team. But which China team is more the question, because someone like Perfect Spark from Orion, yeah, you can bring those guys forward in time and they would work pretty well even if there was no Orion cheating gimmick going on. But the Chinese team that they went with in Orion is called the Football Acrobatic Troupe. And yeah, they're not all acrobats, it's more about the midfielders and the strikers, but Wanli feels like he'd be completely out of place in an acrobat group. I don't think there's necessarily anyone in the Orion team that matches his appearance, but I could be wrong about that. I'll need to check them. But you can break it down further and look at the before they were the acrobatic troupe and just look into the backstory of Mr. Yi and Li Hao and when they were playing for individual Chinese teams. I need to check my notes for this, but the two teams were the Backstreet Boys Squad, or Rojura Shonentai. That was the one that Li Hao played for, which was just absolute scrapping for food every day, living in basically the equivalent of the slums. They're not getting by. Mr. Yi takes them in under their wing and trains them up at football so that they can actually earn some money. And then you've got Shanghai Hoshinekodan, the Shanghai Street Cats. Those are the guys who were an actual football team with financial backing. They were making their way up the Chinese football leagues before Li Hao's team took them on. And this is probably the one where Wanli would make sense, because you've essentially got the street rats with no money, and then you've got the professional upbringing, fairly well-off football kids. And it feels a little unfair to lump Wanli in with one of that. You know, his whole arc in Go 1 was about bullying and overcoming his own weaknesses. But at the end of the day, if his backstory is that he's from China and then he migrated to Tokyo to study at Raimon to learn football, then yeah, he's got a bit of money, so he could fit quite well into that team. And then if they kind of reworked the Chinese team to be less about acrobatics and more just a general representation of China, then yeah, he can also be like the first former teammate that Japan comes up against in the story, because he'd be in the Asian League. He's from an Asian country, whereas, you know, Gabi, Aitor, Riccardo, Victor, even Ade and JP, they're all on European teams. So Wanli you'd actually come up against first, and it could be like a Rampart Junior High type deal. Alternatively, they could go even further into this, and this would be a bit of an Aphrodite, by the way, I'm Korean moment, because this is like the least inspired connection. But if they really wanted to, a Bailong is a Chinese white dragon, and when he played for Raimon, he went to go and Mixi-Max with Zhuge Liang in China. Everything about Bailong is secretly about China. You just can't really say that he's meant to be Chinese, because Bailong is probably not even his real name. He doesn't have a surname, it's just surely a nickname. Like, there he is on the poster. Does this man look like he could be on the Chinese national team? Maybe. He's an anime character, but he doesn't, like Wanli, he doesn't speak in any way that gives you the impression he's meant to be Chinese. It's just the name of the dragon and the Zhuge connection. But if they wanted to make China like like the acrobatic troupe was, if they wanted to make him the final boss of the prelims before you go and take on the world, they could have Wanli and Bailong on a China team, which would be pretty insane and a very strong parallel to Aphrodite, Torch and Gazelle being the final boss of the original trilogy. So that ended up being a bigger talking point, so let's just narrow it down again. Germany has Kaiser. Michael Balzac could play for Germany. Just please don't let it be Brocken Brigade. Or if he goes on Brocken Brigade, please don't give him any screen time. He talks in German, he's got a German name, he's meant to be German, but don't! Even one of the worst characters in Season 1, like Kaiser, doesn't deserve that. Brocken Brigade don't deserve screen time ever again. So there's one more definite. Again, I've restricted this mainly to players who were on Raimon, but if Bailong counts as a member of Raimon, then Sol Daystar definitely does. And he, again, is Irish. They have the choice, essentially, of representing the Republic of Ireland or Northern Ireland. So he's got two potential nations he could go for, but I think almost certainly they'd just pick the Republic of Ireland, right? Do you want to have England and Northern Ireland in the same tournament? You at least, you at least go for the Republic of Ireland. It's not a country that's known for its football, and we all know the only reason that Sol is Irish is because he's ginger. It wasn't deep. They didn't look at this guy and think, you know what, he could be a fascinating representation of Irish culture. I really want to get that in my Inazuma 11 game. No, they said he had orange hair and they made him Irish because apparently all Irish people are ginger. That's how deep Inazuma goes with its lore. So, yes, Sol Daystar could play for the Republic of Ireland, but I have nothing more to add. So that's it for the definites, but there is also another very maybe link. I think that this FFI season would still probably want to have a USA team in it. They had one in the original trilogy, they had one in Arion. It just makes sense to have a USA team. And there are a couple of characters in Go 1 and Go 2 who have American accents. Just, again, like, Sol has an Irish accent which allows him to play for another country, but really it's just another variation on the English accent. I think it's the same with the American accents, but even more so. At least with Sol Daystar, they picked Irish because he's ginger. With America, they use that accent on a few characters in Go, but I think it is literally just a coincidence, and they're not trying to imply that these characters are in fact American. But the leading rep would be Dodge, Doug MacArthur. He very much speaks with an American accent, and therefore, if they wanted to, they could put him on the USA team. Additionally, they also use the USA accent to represent anyone from the future. So, Faerun, Simian Ape, Zanuck Avalonic, they are all Japanese in their backstory. They're all like descendants, like Simian Ape is Arion's descendant, Zanuck is Zack Avalon's descendant. So they're just using American to say, whoa, it's the future, rather than they are American. They literally live in Japan. But if you want to put Faerun somewhere that's not Japan, I guess he does have an American accent. I think Dodge is like the most intentional, but I think it's just for this coincidence for the sake of picking another accent. Oh, and also on the topic of people for the future, they would never put Goldie in another season, but I think it's great that she's the only Scottish character in Inazuma history. Imagine Goldie as the captain of the Scotland team. She's got the accent, so, you know, a character is already, like, canonically dead, and she's only looking out for Faerun, doesn't want to play football, but she speaks with a Scottish accent, so it's possible. So there's two more bonus shouts before we get to the final discussion. Lars Dijkstra can play for the Netherlands. Sven Johansson can play for Sweden. Do you even know which characters I'm talking about here? They would not. get this treatment. They've been given foreign accents and names, but they would not be used. But I think the final topic to close this off is, if we've sent pretty much all of Raimon Go off to different countries, who's left to play for Japan? There's shockingly not very many. You've got Arion, he's going to be the captain, and you can maybe use Roma and Bailong if you don't put them in Italy and China, respectively. But, like, I think the only option is you create a brand new team from scratch, or you use the Earth 11. The team that was in Go Galaxy anyway just gets recontextualized into a normal FFI. They're not saving the world from space, but these Japanese amateurs are the new team after everyone in Raimon, instead of not being picked, they simply play for their own nations. They don't represent Japan, so therefore the organization just takes a risk and builds the Earth 11 for the sake of winning a slightly lower stakes tournament. Except Riccardo and Victor aren't even there, so it's like even worse than before. You have to invent another 2 characters on top, or bring in Zach Avalon right from the start, or you have like Sam, Lucian Dark, Shun, Eugene, Rusty. That's the pool of what you're picking for, or just anyone else who was on an opposing team. Even like Alessandro Il Grande, he's got a name from like Italy or wherever as well. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. You have like Njord Snow on the team at that point to represent Japan. Just ignore his Yorkshireisms. There's very little you can go with, and I think you pretty much have to have the Earth 11 including Arion and then fill the other 2 spots. The only thing with that is it changes the Astro Black dynamic, because he's got 2 very good options. He could be on Orpheus with Italy again and have a strong dynamic with Riccardo, or he can have the originally planned one. He is still coaching Earth 11, now just Inazuma National as intended, through to the end. Maybe he really wants to take down Orpheus, and therefore Riccardo starts digging into his backstory while this new Earth 11 bunch, for the most part, kind of trust him. So does Arion. In fact, yeah, with Victor and Riccardo removed, I think the Earth 11 would, generally speaking, be more trusting of Ray Dark. And they might still need Riccardo and new coach Paolo Bianchi to look into his backstory, and that's when they kind of realise what he's like, and they go from there. So I think ultimately, yeah, you've got a choice. You either put Ray Dark with Italy, or you put him against Italy in the hands of Japan with the Earth 11. I think you can't really have the Earth 11 without Ray Dark, so if you put Ray Dark on Orpheus, then you have to create a new, from scratch, but still much more competent Japan team to carry the rest. Well, that was more than I thought. I thought this was going to be a 10-minute video, just, you know, what if these characters were actually from the countries that the dubbers wanted them to be from, but I ended up going into way more detail than I thought, so I will say see you later. If you want more what if topics like this, feel free to make some suggestions, or I'll see what I can come up with by myself. Would you like this Go 3 where it's just an FFI, but the Earth 11 takes on all of the previous members of Raimon? It could be a laugh. It gets Hugh onto a major team, and that's all that really matters.